So Mark Twain once said that a lie can be halfway around the world before the truth even has its pants on. So happy Christopher Columbus Day, right? Not exactly. Here's Raw Story put 5 quotes up, but I'm gonna first start out with this one, okay? Because this one just, I don't know how many, this one just stuck with me. And Columbus and his men also used the Taino as sex slaves. It was a common reward for Columbus's men for him to present them with local women to rape. Not women, girls. As he began exporting Taino as slaves to other parts of the world, the sex slave trade became an important part of the business, as Columbus wrote to a friend in 1500. 100 castellanos, which is a Spanish coin, so for 100 castellanos are as easily obtained for a woman as for a farm, and it is very general, and there are plenty of dealers who go about looking for girls. Those from 9 to 10 years old are now in demand. 9 to 10 years old. So he's not, I don't know, Columbus himself isn't saying that he wants it, but he is part of the sex trade. And so Columbus's men are pedophiles, and Columbus himself was the one that was selling, the girls to them. So he, perpetuated not only sex slavery, but pedophilia. He was accepting of pedophilia. And could we assume, I don't know if Columbus had a wife or not. I don't remember Columbus having a wife. So, if I was a Native American, I would not mark October 12th, 1492 as a very good day. This is not a day to celebrate. There's a bunch of lies. There's a bunch of, it's insanity. It's insanity. Yeah, the Columbus coming to the New World, right, with Europe and the Americas colliding, that did create a different perspective. There's trade, and there's goods. There's, the potato, the tomato, the agricultural techniques here were actually, in the Americas, were more advanced than Europe. So there was, this trade. So that changed the game, but just because you change the game doesn't make you a hero. It just means you changed the game. Conquest, the perfect chaser for expelling Muslims and Jews. You don't have to be an academic to link Spain's colonial expansion abroad. What? So here's some quotes. Okay, Conquest, the perfect tracer for expelling Muslims and Jews. You don't have to be an academic to link Spain's colonial expansion abroad with its Inquisition at home. The Spanish Inquisition. Columbus came out of the Spanish Inquisition. Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand had aligned themselves with the Catholic Church, so they declared war on the Jews, and they declared war on Muslims, and if you weren't Catholic Christian, then you would be murdered, you'd be killed, or you'd be exiled. And so Columbus made the connection himself when he went out there. Of course, he was going to, promote the Christian, the Catholic Christianity all across the world. So he wrote to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain, Your Highness, as Catholic Christians and princes who love the holy Christian faith and the propagation of it, and who are enemies to the sect of Mahoma, which is Islam, and to all idolatries and heresies, resolve to send me Cristobal Colon to the said parts of India to see the said princes, with a view that they might be converted to our holy faith. Thus, after having turned out all the Jews from your kingdoms and lordships, your highness gave orders to me that with a sufficient fleet I should go to the said parts of India. I shall not forget sleep, and I shall work at the business of navigation so that the service is performed. So the missionary work combined with imperialism is, a major part of this. And you're not allowed to murder anybody who is a Christian. If they were converted into Christianity, you couldn't kill them. You couldn't do anything about it. So how did Columbus solve that? Well, he just wouldn't baptize them. He just wouldn't convert them to Christianity. And some of the atrocities is just disgusting. I'm going to get to more. Katie Halper is the person who collected these quotes that I'm reading right now from Raw Story. Just the way they would, I heard that they would cut people up. He would, Christopher Columbus, he never actually came to America. He came to the Americas, but he landed on San Salvador. That was the first island that he landed on. And then he went to the Dominican Republic / Haiti, which they call Hispaniola. And so he only went to the islands of the Bahamas, and then he would sail back. So they never actually got to the mainland. They never made it to North America, the United States of America, the 48 states, Florida, the coast. He didn't get to it. He didn't even know. He just knew about that island. And he forced peaceful natives to work in his gold mines until they died of exhaustion. If an Indian worker did not deliver his full quota of gold dust by Columbus's deadline, soldiers would cut off the man's hands and then tie it around his neck to send a message. Slavery was so intolerable for these sweet, gentle island people that at one point, 100 of them, at least at one point, committed mass suicide. 100 of them just said, fuck it, and killed themselves. Catholic law forbade enslavement of Christians, so, he never baptized them. So I'm going to get back to the raw story. The natives are so nice, we'd be crazy not to enslave them. Here's another word, from Columbus's diary. The natives, they brought us parrots and balls of cotton and spears and many other things, which they exchanged for the glass beads and the hawk's bells. They willingly traded everything they owned. They were well built with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms and do not know them, for I showed them a sword. They took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane. They would make 5 fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. With 50 men, it's a genocide. Some people said there's 8 million, some people said there's 1. Most people say that there's about 3 million natives. There's Arawaks, Tainos, and then I saw another one with the L. But most Americans don't know that. We know the first white man who came to, this country, but we don't know who the people actually were when they were here. There are the Tainos and the Arawaks. And then there's an L word, too, that I'm going to eventually find out, and I'll be like, now I know it, but I know at least 2 of the Indian tribes. As soon as I arrived in the Indies, in the first island, which I found, I took some of the natives by force in order that they might learn and might give me information of whatever there is in these parts. And so it was that they soon understood us, and we them, either by speech or by signs, and they have been very serviceable. So he was right about how the subjugation was. He said just 50 men take over the entire island. Rape. Not only were they buying, girls for their own, sick, perverted desires, they were raping, right? So they were raping girls, raping women. He was such a mensch, he would let his men do whatever they wanted with the natives. One of his men and a childhood friend of Columbus, Michel de Cuneo, describes in a letter how he raped a native woman. While I was in the boat, I captured a very beautiful Carib woman who the said Lord Admiral gave to me. When I had taken her to my cabin, she was naked, as was their custom. I was filled with a desire to take my pleasure with her and attempted to satisfy my desire. She was unwilling and so treated me with her nails that I wished I had never begun. But to cut a long story short, I then took a piece of rope and whipped her soundly, and she let forth such incredible screams that you would not have believed your ears. Eventually we came to such terms, I assure you, that you would have thought that she had been brought up in a school for whores. In a school for whores. So this woman was fighting, and then eventually he says that he was able to get her submitted enough to where she was just a whore, a harlot. So once he was able to take advantage of her, he had successfully, right? He's bragging about this. He's writing the letter. He clearly doesn't feel bad about it. And Columbus didn't feel bad about putting little girls 9 to 10 years old into the sex slave trade. He didn't mind. It did not bother him. I mean, why would you write about it? Why would you? So that's, it's sick to begin with, but the way that they feel no remorse, it's like they have no conscience. And some people would say we've been genociding from the time we've got here till today, right? What, 1 million dead in Iraq? How many more people are we going to kill? Do we ever stop? Not so Christian. The anecdote captured above was not the same isolated incident of cruelty. How ironically, but no way surprisingly, the Spanish who came to save the heathens from their idolatry weren't very Christ-like in their behavior. In the book, The Devastation of the Indies, Bartholomew de las Casas, the priest who accompanied Columbus on his conquest of Cuba, detailed the abuse and murder of the native population. Endless testimonies proved the mild and pacific temperament of the natives, but our work was to exasperate, ravage, kill, mangle, and destroy. And the Christians, with their horses and swords and pikes, began to carry out massacres and strange cruelties against them. They attacked the towns and spared neither the children nor the aged, nor pregnant women, nor women in childbed, not only stabbing them and dismembering them, but cutting them to pieces, as if dealing with sheep in the slaughterhouse. They laid bets as to who, with one stroke of the sword, could split a man in two, or cut off his head, or spill out his entrails in a single stroke of the pike. They took infants from their mother's breast, snatching them by the legs and pitching them head first against the crags, and snatched them by the arms and threw them into the rivers, roaring with laughter and saying as the babies fell into the water, "Boil there, you offspring of the devil." Other infants they put to the sword along with their mothers and anyone else who happened to be nearby. They made some low, wide gallows on which the hanged victims' feet almost touched the ground, stringing up their victims in lots of 13 in memory of our Redeemer and his 12 apostles, then set burning wood at their feet and thus burned them alive. To others they attached straw or wrapped their whole bodies in straw and set them afire. While still others, all those they wanted to capture alive, they cut off their hands and hung them around the victim's neck, saying, "Go now, carry the message," meaning take the news to the Indians who have fled to the mountains. They usually dealt with the chieftains and nobles in the following way. They made a grid of rods which they placed on forked sticks, then lashed the victims to the grid and lighted a smoldering fire underneath, so that little by little, as those captives screamed in despair and torment, their souls would leave them. So happy Columbus Day? Actually, let's follow the cities and states who have stopped celebrating Columbus Day and celebrate instead Indigenous Peoples Day. I think that's a very good idea. Let's learn about the indigenous people, the who are, the Taino Indians. We should talk about who the Taino and the Arawak Indians are. He dwindled them down from 3 million to a point where there is none left on the census documents. I have heard today that there are a few remnants, at least people who claim to be Taino or Arawak. But that's genocide, and then that doesn't stop. That, and then it carries on with Pizarro and Cortes and Hernando de Soto. He's the first white man into Kentucky, and he was a Spanish conquistador, just like Columbus was, just like Pizarro and Cortes. De Soto rode with Pizarro when they massacred the Incas. So the Shawnee and the Cherokee, that was De Soto's men. De Soto got to Kentucky in 1540. So that's, those are conquistadors, and to assume that their brutality was any less, I think would be silly, because, in their documents with De Soto, he said he wrote down a whole bunch of villages. But then when La Salle came down, just a few, a century, I was going to say a few decades later, but it was a century. When La Salle came down the river a century later, he only talked about a few isolated tribes here and there. So Columbus had a second trip. He goes there, he goes back to the king and queen. Guess what? I found all this gold and all this slaves. Just give me some more money. So they do. But they also bring back cannons and attack dogs. They intended to subjugate the whole island. If a native resisted slavery, Columbus would cut off a nose or an ear. If slaves tried to escape, Columbus had them burned alive, lighting them on fire, Other times he sent attack dogs to hunt them, and the dogs would tear off the arms and legs of the screaming natives while they were still alive. Just letting dogs chew humans up. If the Spaniards ran short of meat to feed the dogs, Arawak babies were killed for dog food. Parading women naked through the streets and selling them into slavery. One man caught stealing corn had his nose and ears cut off. He was placed in shackles and then auctioned off as a slave. A woman who dared to suggest that Columbus was of lowly birth, which I don't understand that. You're born, you're not even, white, and I don't even know what lowly birth would mean. He was a bastard child. But just because they suggested that Columbus didn't have a great birth. He was punished by his brother Bartolome, who also traveled to the Caribbean. She was stripped naked, paraded around the colony on the back of a mule. Bartolome ordered that her tongue be cut out. So Columbus's brother is cutting out a woman's tongue. First they stripped her naked, paraded her around the town, and then they cut out her tongue. Christopher congratulated him for defending the family. Bobadilla, this is the next governor, Francisco de Bobadilla, actually comes to the island of Hispaniola and arrested Columbus and all of the brothers. He collected the testimonies of 23 people who had seen or heard about the treatment meted out by Columbus and his brothers. Even those who loved him had to admit the atrocities that had taken place. So the story of Francisco de Bobadilla, it was actually a kind of interesting one. So, Columbus' acts of cruelty were unspeakable and legendary, even in his own day, that, Francisco de Bobadilla arrested Columbus and his two brothers, slapped them in chains, shipped them back to Spain to answer for their crimes against the Arawaks. But the king and queen of Spain, their treasury filling up with gold, pardoned Columbus, let him go free, and then they give him another commission, give him some more boats, gave him some more weapons. So Columbus and his brothers were forced to go back to Spain. He never got his title back, Admiral of the Sea, but he was set free and he was allowed to sail back to the Caribbeans. But they arrested him. I think that's important, that if another Spaniard arrested him, then it seems as though, there's something amiss. One of Columbus's men, Bartolome de las Casas, who I read a quote from, was so mortified by Columbus's brutal atrocities against the native peoples that he quit working for Columbus and became a Catholic priest. He described how the Spaniards under Columbus's command cut off the legs of children who ran from them to test the sharpness of their blades. Just to see, hey, how sharp is our blades? I don't know. Let's cut these children up and see, oh wow, our blades are really sharp. We are very good at sharpening our blades. Cortes de las Casas, the men made bets as who, with one sweep of his sword, would cut a person in half. Who could cut him in half? Hey, can you cut him all the way? Oh, I only went halfway. Oh, I went all the way through. He said that Columbus's men poured people full of boiling soap. Soap is boiling. They poured it, I don't know, in them or on them. But, talk about a horrible death. Being cut up alive is worse. It's pretty bad. Drowning's pretty bad. A gunshot to the head actually seems humane compared to boiling soap, dying by boiling soap. In a single day, De las Casas was an eyewitness as the Spanish soldiers dismembered, beheaded, or raped 3,000 natives. In one day, De las Casas saw this. 3,000. My eyes have seen these acts so foreign to human nature that I now tremble as I write. Such inhumanities and barbarisms were committed in my sight as no age can parallel. De las Casas spent the rest of his life trying to protect the helpless native people, but after a while there were no more natives to protect. Experts generally agree that before 1492 the population on the island of Hispaniola probably numbered above 3 million. Within 20 years of Spanish arrival, it was reduced to only 60,000. 60,000. That's 4 zeros. 1 million is 6 zeros. So it went from 3 million with 6 zeros down to only 60,000. That's what, 2% of the population after 20 years, and then 50 years, not a single original native inhabitant could be found. So after 50 years of Columbus arriving to the island of Hispaniola, there were no more Arawaks, no more Tainos, and there's an L word. There's 3 tribes that I know of, at least, that we, today, that were not there. They were wiped out. Genocide. It was a fucking full-blown genocide. Hitler would look at this with, wonder and awe and say, that's exactly what you need. You need to purify the race, clear out the people, and then set, your people on top of them. In 1516, Spanish historian Peter Martyr wrote, a ship without compass, chart or guide, but only following the trail of dead Indians who had been thrown from the ships, could find its way from the Bahamas to Hispaniola. Where is Hispaniola? Just follow the bodies. That's where it's at. Sinoa further notes that he took a beautiful teenage Carib girl. Oh, so the one that he raped, that wasn't even, that might have been, you know, the 9 to 10 year olds that Columbus was peddling out to his men. And they told him, you know, as a personal slave, a gift from Christopher Columbus himself. Columbus gave this to Cuneo, and Cuneo was the one who talked about raping that woman. And so that was a gift from Christopher Columbus himself. Christopher Columbus himself said he wanted, you know, the 9 to 10-year-old girls were in high demand. If you had 100 coins, you could either get a farm or you could get a girl. And Christopher Columbus gave this friend of his, you know, Columbus isn't a good guy. In his own words, he talked about how he thrashed her mercilessly and he raped her. And she resisted with all her strength. So they were not, you know, accepting of this. While Columbus once referred to the Taino Indians as cannibals, it was made up, and is to this day still taught in some U.S. schools in order to help justify the slaughtering and enslavement of the people. And he wrote to the Spanish monarchs in 1493, it is possible with the name of the Holy Trinity to sell all the slaves which it is possible to sell. Here there are so many slaves also Brazil would, that although they are living things, they are also as good as gold. But the Taino people turned out not to be very good workers in the plantations that the Spaniards and then later the French established on Hispaniola. They resented their lands and children being taken and attempted to fight back against the invaders. Since the Taino were obviously standing in the way of Spain's progress, Columbus sought to impose discipline on them, even for a minor offense. The Indians' nose or ears were cut off. I mean, cut off ears and noses. And so he could go back to the village to impress the brutality the Spanish were capable of. As a sign, look what we are willing to do. We're willing to cut off your noses and your ears. And if you want to fuck with us, your noses and your ears might be cut off too. Now they got to live without a nose or an ear. Columbus attacked them with dogs, skewered them with pikes, shot them. Eventually the life for a Taino became so unbearable, as Pedro de Cordoba wrote to King Ferdinand in a 1517 letter, as a result of the sufferings and hard labor they endured, the Indians choose and have chosen suicide. Occasionally, 100 have committed mass suicide. Every once in a while, 100 of them would just kill themselves. The women, exhausted by labor, have shunned conception and childbirth. Many, when pregnant, have taken something to abort and have aborted. Others, after delivery, have killed their children with their own hands so as not to leave them in such oppressive slavery. So that's just like Margaret Garner, the black woman from Boone County, who would rather kill her own kid than to see her go back to the brutality of the Boone Countyans in Kentucky. No, I'm not going to let my kids go back there. No way. I'd rather have them killed so they wouldn't have to deal with it. Eventually, Columbus and his brother Bartholomew Columbus, who was left in charge of the island, simply resorted to wiping out the Taino altogether. Prior to Columbus's arrival, some scholars placed the population of Haiti Hispaniola now at 16 million at around 1.5 to 3 million people. By 1496, it was down to 1.1 million, according to a census done by Bartholomew Columbus. By 1516, the indigenous population was 12,000, and according to Las Casas, who were there by 1542, fewer than 2,200 natives were alive, and by 1555, every single one of them was dead. In 50 years, they were wiped out. You know, from 3 million down to 12,000 to 200 to 0. Columbus landed in San Salvador. Columbus quite literally landed in what is known as the Bahamas, later Hispaniola, present-day Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. Upon arrival, Columbus and his expedition of weapon-laden Spaniards met the Arawaks, Tainos, and the Lucayans. The Lucayans, L-U-C-A-Y-A-N-S. All of them friendly, according to Columbus's writings. Soon after arriving, Columbus wrecked the Santa Maria, and the Arawaks worked for hours to save the crew and the cargo. So the Native Americans were nice, and they were excited when they saw Columbus. And when he went up to Columbus, when the Santa Maria was crashed, they even helped save him, his crew, and his cargo. It would have been better for the Arawaks or the Lucayans or the Tainos to have slaughtered Columbus as soon as he landed on the deck. As soon as he landed on that island, just to wipe him out. That would have been safer. If they were cannibals, if they were as bad as he had tried to make them out to be, they would have saved themselves. But they weren't as bad as they were. In fact, the people who were brutal, and I don't even know if they're cannibals. So what? The Spaniards didn't eat them, but they fed them to their dogs, and they killed them for sport. They would chop off, people's ears and noses and try to cut them in half just to see how sharp their swords were. And after several months in the Caribbean, on January 13th, 1493, 2 natives were murdered during trading. Columbus, who had otherwise described the natives as gentle people, wrote, "They're evil, and I believe they're from the island of Carib, and they eat men." He also described them as savage cannibals with dog-like noses that drank the blood of their victims. So, if the Spaniards didn't eat the native men, does that make it better somehow? Is that like, oh well, they killed them all, but they didn't eat them, so that's okay. They used them for dog food. They didn't drink their blood, but they played sport with them. They would cut out their entrails, cut out the stomachs to see if their intestines would spill out, and all for gold. And when there was no gold to be found on the island, then they said, well, at least we have slaves. And then they weren't very good slaves. And in fact, De las Casas, who grew to regret it later, says, well, instead of using the Native Americans, who seem to love freedom to a point where they're willing to kill themselves, why don't we use the Africans? That's where the African slave trade began. The Native Americans couldn't be subjugated, so they went and got some Africans. And so happy Columbus Day? Man, that's fucked up. It seems as though we're just supposed to, it's not just Columbus, check out George Washington, check out Andrew Jackson, check out, all these. It seems like you have to slaughter millions of men to be honored in American history. If you slaughter millions of men, if you're an Adolf Hitler in American history, then you are honored and celebrated. But if you're Hitler, right, then you're the evil person. But we, on our own $20 bill, Andrew Jackson, he was still the Trail of Tears. George Washington, he wiped out the Iroquois. He genocided the Iroquois with a scorched earth campaign. In addition to, he wanted to steal land. He was a land speculator, and he was a slave owner. He owned a plantation. And yeah, the oppression by the British wasn't good, but, the revolution in Haiti and the revolution in France were truly revolutionary. I'm not for sure if we can even say that we had one revolution, at least a violent revolution, in terms of a change of leadership and a change of constitution. Those things have happened. Elections have brought about new leaders, and we've had 4 constitutions here in Kentucky. So that is, that's something, right? That's a type of revolution when you can get new leadership, when you can get a new constitution, you're changing the rules to the game. But Thomas Jefferson, he said that we needed a revolution every 20 years. And right after the revolution, you had Shays' Rebellion. A lot of these soldiers who were having their lands taken away from them because, they weren't being paid their salary for fighting in the revolution, so they couldn't pay their taxes, and then they took the land. That's the reason why the revolution started, was over taxes. And here, Daniel Shay couldn't pay his taxes, and they were going to take his land, and instead of allowing them to take his land, he started a rebellion, another revolution. And what did Washington do? He went and quashed it. He went with a bunch of soldiers and didn't mind declaring war on his own countrymen. Deserters, maybe they had better intentions, Jefferson and the founding fathers, but a lot of people were fighting just at the point of a gun. And if you deserted, George Washington would use you as an example, and he would kill you, just like Che Guevara. Some people want to say, well, Che Guevara was a brutal person. He was. In the United Nations, he said, we killed deserters, and we have executions there for the counter-revolutionaries. But if you want to look down on Che Guevara, then you cannot be a hypocrite and say that George Washington was any better. So I'm going to end off there. I want to read a little bit more from Howard Zinn. I didn't even get to Howard Zinn, The People's History of the United States, but this book will knock you on your ass. It doesn't just start out from the Arawak Taino perspective, but it goes throughout sort of the losers of society, the poor, the oppressed. That's the perspective. It's not kings and queens. Who gives a shit what, Ferdinand and Isabella was talking about, and how they gained power, and how, they were able to establish a modern nation state. How did the Taino people feel? Do we have any words written down from any of the Taino? What language did they speak? Who were they? What kind of people were they? I am so actually saddened by this entire thing. I'm going to do some research on the Arawaks, the Tainos, and the Lucayans. So the Lucayans, Tainos, Arawaks. Who are they? What do we know about them? The Native Indigenous Peoples Days. We should be looking at the Native Indigenous Peoples. That's what this day should be about, not about honoring imperialistic, genocidal psychos. And he did it in the name of Christianity, just like the KKK, just like ISIS. People will go to the extreme of any religion, and to assume that because he believed in God, well, Columbus believed in God, he must be a good man. No, he wasn't a good man. He was a dirtbag. He was a shitty person, and fuck Christopher Columbus. I never celebrate Christopher Columbus, and it's a bullshit holiday that we should have got rid of a long time ago.